The Electoral Commission of South Africa is set to allocate millions to political parties represented in Parliament. The governing ANC is expected to get the lion's share of the funding. According to the IEC, payment will be done in line with regulations. We're now joined by Matsobane, Nkoko, Party Funding Manager at the IEC. Thank you very much, sir, for your time this afternoon. And so this allocation, we understand that it's some 5 million rand, perhaps just an education moment in terms of how it works that the IEC then gives some sort of funding to political parties in the country.
Okay, thank you very much, Dudu, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. Indeed, we are currently sitting with an amount of 5 million rand in the Multi-Party Democracy Fund. This, Dudu, you will remember that is the second kitty, if you like, in the funding of political parties. There is a kitty, which is the main one, that is called the Represented Political Party Fund, and then this second one called the Multi-Party Democracy Fund. These funds are provided for in the Political Party Funding Act, which basically is about funding of political parties in essence. Now, the 5 million rand that we are going to be distributing, and I must say it's in the next week or so, we are busy with the process of disbursing that money, is money that has been contributed by corporate South Africa and certain individuals in this country. So that's the money that we will be distributing. And interestingly, it comes at the time when we are also going to be distributing the fourth allocation of political parties in this financial year, which is the larger component that comes from the Represented Political Party Fund.
So for the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, so the 5 million rand, you are distributing that among how many parties?
That amount is to be distributed among 15 political parties that are represented in the various provincial legislatures and the national parliament. You'll know that we've got a total of 15 political parties currently in this political term of office.
The corporate SA companies that you speak of, are you at liberty to share who they are that have put this money into this fund?
The legislation grants contributors to the Multi-Party Democracy Fund the ability to remain anonymous. And in this particular case, we haven't been able to get permission from them to distribute the money. But I can guarantee you that it's a very well-known, corporate company in this particular country, which is not contributing for the first time. They do so virtually every election year. They come on board really to contribute to this kitty. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty at this point to indicate who they are.
Sure. Is it just one company, or is it a number of companies? Are there terms and conditions, or is this just out of the goodness of their hearts?
This company, I must indicate, even before this legislation came into effect, they were giving money to individual political parties. And they're doing it out of their, the goodness of their heart, corporate social investment as it were. But when this legislation came on board, they found it appropriate to rather do it in that particular fashion, because the Commission has got a formula which basically it uses for the Represented Political Party Fund as well. So they felt it appropriate to do it through the Commission in that sense. Yes, the whole amount, 5 million rand as it stands, comes from one corporate company in this country, and there's a few thousand rands that have come from individuals. I'm not sure if you are aware, but a couple of months ago, we reported we gazetted that there was only a few thousand rands, which would not make sense to distribute at the time, because if you consider the bank charges, it wouldn't make sense to be distributing that small amount. So that's why it's not exactly 5 million rand. It's 5 million rand and a few thousand rands on the side.
Okay. Mr. Nkoko, given that this is said to be the biggest election that we will see since 1994, this amount, is it unusual? So when you compare it to other elections, just this Multi-Party Democracy Fund, is it unusual? Is this the lowest amount? Is this the highest amount? Is this the fairest amount?
Unfortunately, we don't have the benefit of comparison. Remember, the Party Funding Act only came into effect on the 1st of April 2021. Yes, in that particular year, we had the local government elections at the end of that year. And I think at that point, we stood at about 12 million rand, which is what was distributed. And that was, done in one financial year, if you like, because we had the elections in November that year. There was about 12 million rand at that point that we distributed. Now we are coming into 2024, which is another election year. And cumulatively, we are sitting at 7.5 million rand now. We distributed about 2.5 million rand during the first quarter of the 23-24 financial year. Now, on the last quarter of the 23-24 financial year, we are distributing another 5 million rand. We are anticipating that in the next couple of months, further other contributors will come through, and I'm anticipating that we will surpass the 12 million rand that was distributed in 2021.
Mm-hmm. What complication, if at all, does the recent partial victory of independence that took the matter to court to enter according to the terms that they wanted into the elections, what complication does that add, if at all, to this multi-party democracy fund?
I wouldn't call it complication per se, Dudu. This is just something that means we're going to have to increase our effort, our resources, and our energies in terms of making sure that we allocate money to those independents as well. As it stands, the parliament is seized with draft legislation on inclusion of the individuals in the whole multi-party or political party funding space. So that legislation will provide for the allocation to those independents. So the minute that we know how many have been elected to parliament or to the various provincial legislatures, we will need to bring them into the fold. We are talking 15 political parties today. If there are additional parties to the 15, of course, others might fall off, others may join and all of that. If there are additional parties to the 15 and independents also come on board, then we're going to have to also provide for those. So we won't talk 15 anymore. We may talk, hundreds, tens, and so forth and so forth. So that's the challenge, I guess, that we are faced with. But we'll just need to increase our resources in that regard.
All right.
In order to be able to provide for those years.
Okay. Mr. Nkoko, you spoke of the represented political party fund. And so where that kitty is concerned, how much is in that kitty and when will the distribution be?
Yes. This kitty, Dudu, at the beginning of the financial year, as soon as an allocation is made by the Minister of Finance, we do gazette that information. For the current financial year, 23-24, which is ending in the next couple of months, a total allocation there was 350 million rand, which is to be distributed among the same 15 political parties. Now, what then happens is that National Treasury on a quarterly basis releases an allocation. So the 350 million rand is broken down into 4 equal amounts, which I think is about 87 million rand or so per quarter. Now, on a quarterly basis, we then receive that 87 million rand into our account, which we then distribute among the biggest political parties. Yes, a component of it is equitable, which is 33% of it is equitable allocation, and the remainder, which is 7%, is a proportional allocation. As you would know, the African National Congress is the largest party, across the legislatures, I think in total they have about 230 seats of the total 430 seats. So in that regard, the ANC gets the lion's share, as you said at the beginning, followed obviously by the Democratic Alliance and then the Economic Freedom Fighters. That's how the allocation is done. Through that particular formula that I referred to. Okay.
So maybe the lion's share of 5 million rand is what? 10% of the 5 million, 5% of the 5 million, 2% of the 5 million? How much exactly are they getting?
Trust me, it's more than 50%. I think the African National Congress will get, because it's got more than 50% representation, by the way, in the legislatures. I think they're looking at about just over 3 million rand. I think that's my calculation.
So the same, okay, the same would go for that 350 million rand for the represented political party fund. They'd get more than 50% of that.
Absolutely. I think more than 150 million rand would go to the African National Congress in that regard.
All right. So for the last reporting period, when it came to the declarations of political parties in terms of who was funding them, the last time, at least we checked, the ANC had not declared in the last reporting period, and you since issued a request for representation, asking for reasons why they submitted late. One, have they submitted? Two, have they furnished those reasons as to why they submitted late?
Dudu, I think on that particular one, I really will need to refer. But certainly, I remember they only reported what was received in much earlier quarters. And the legislation is very clear. A late declaration needs to be supported by reasons, and those reasons must be good enough for the commission to consider. If not, then the process will then involve praying to the Electoral Court for certain administrative fines. At this point, Dudu, I'm unable to tell exactly where that position is, particularly given that when we send them that letter of direction, it was sometime during the month of December. And it could be that their 30-day period is only ending any day now. That's something that I'll need to look into.
Thank you very much for that. Just a final question. Be it the represented political party fund or the multi-party democracy fund and all these monies that are thrown at these political parties, are there any conditions? Is it just Christmas? Say, here you go, here's the money, go do your thing. Are there any conditions?
Thanks for that question. You remember earlier I mentioned that these corporate entities in South Africa were giving money to political parties directly. Under those circumstances, political parties would have Christmas. However, if it's done through the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, there is a section in the Act, I think it's section 8 of the Act, or section 7 as it were. It's very specific on what this money could be used for. Among other things, the money cannot be used to pay salaries for people that are also employed in government or legislatures and so forth and so forth. That money needs to be used specifically for party political purposes. And there are specific conditions that have been set in that regard. Even as we receive the financial statements of political parties that are audited, that area we look at very closely, because if it is found that money was used for something that's not provided for in the legislation, in the next allocation of the RPPF, the Representative Political Party Fund, or the Multi-Party Democracy Fund, we've got powers to claw back that money that was used, contrary to what the legislation provides for. So it's not Christmas party at all.
Thank you very much for your time. Very informative. Thank you, Mr. Matsobane Nkoko, Party Funding Manager at the Independent Electoral Commission.